Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thanks for joining us in this beautiful amphitheater of the Jordan Park. You are welcome for this session, and I would like to say hi to those that watch us remotely. I'm not going to say telespectators, but this is a wonderful thing about the Rencontre Économique d'Aix is that you can actually watch it remotely. So we're going to talk about health and pharmaceuticals. This is a topical subject. We're going to talk about the geopolitical aspect of pharmaceuticals. It is omnipresent everywhere in the society, in the industrial society, from a geopolitical and economic point of view, but also for mankind, because it's not only a matter of economy, but also healthcare. And when we deal with healthcare, we deal with humankind, and we'll see how we can balance this out for each and everyone, and how we can have equal access when we have pandemics. This is what we're going to delve into under the light of the medicines. So we will have Philippe Trenard, who's at the other end of the stage, who's a member of the Cercle des Économistes. You're going to moderate the session. Thank you. And I'm going to give you the floor in a few minutes to set the scene and to introduce the subject. Then we have Yasmine Belkaïd, who's a general manager of the Institut Pasteur. You had the lab meta-organist. I'm not going to talk about all your qualifications. Everything is written down on the website. If some want to know more, they will look it up. Then we have Mr. Etienne Tichit. You actually in Novo Nordisk, a Danish company specialized with hormonal obesity and a lot of things. Alex Prader, you're the president of the April Group. April is one of the important large insurance brokers in France. You invest in innovating companies in the segment of healthcare. You are an entrepreneur and have been so for 30 years. You are passionate about tech and healthcare, so you are more than welcome here. And Claire Magon, thank you for being with us. You are the General Director of Médecins Sans Frontières. After having studied political science, you've worked for many humanitarian associations in some regions of the world. You know Africa, you know Gaza. You've been there recently. And this gives you a role of privileged observer for the situation that is rolling out as we speak. We're going to give you the floor, Emmanuel. Philippe, thank you. I'm taking the floor as an economist under your purview because you're all specialists of the field, but maybe I'm going to introduce and launch the debate. First, let's say that COVID has shown that France is heavily dependent, we can talk about Europe, in the ballpark of 80% of most of APRs that are generated in France and in Europe, and they come from Asia. And this situation is not new. However, we are on a train which is not going into in a favorable direction, and it is a matter of concern for different reasons. There are political options underpinning this, of course. On the one side, you have some people saying that this is the consequence of globalization, that it would actually entail specialization with unfair competitiveness, with social costs that would be insufficient, and a disappearance of the industry and the industry of pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical activity. I'm not sure it gives actually a complete and a comprehensive view of the landscape, but it's an interpretation. Another interpretation, which is more liberal, would say globalization is perfect. We specialize in what we are skillful. The problem is, and that's the topic of X, that the world is being fragmented, and tomorrow we may depend on countries that could be closed up, and we would not have access anymore to their APIs, to their active pharmaceutical ingredients. But we have an incumbent pharmaceutical industry in France. I don't want to say that the rest of the European industry should be neglected. On the contrary, we should have a European perspectives. We have a competitive market, and we have medical research that is very favorable, and that relies on training, academic training that is most prestigious. In practice, however, things are less solid than it appears, like a clay giant with feet of clay. Less and less we will have a tendency to be independent, and more researchers will try to look for the US academics and universities, and our researchers will try to find better compensation, but also a biotop that would be interesting in terms of investment and regulation. So we have to highlight the regulatory aspect. Maybe it's not the most difficult subject to change, but there are also economic aspects that are rather more difficult to circumvent because they challenge not only just a few dissensions, but also a system that is more embedded, because we do have a market in France, but in reality, it is not sure that this market works well, because when we look at the market cogs, we've been disconnected from the pharmaceutical and research because of the protection system that we have set up. Economically, we should not pit against the pharmaceutical industry and research and development. However, in reality, the institutions that have been set up have not allowed a harmonious relationship to go forward. For those that are older, like me, we had a monopoly of social security on the one side. On the other side, we had pharmaceutical industry, and the relationship was quite favorable with a social security that was paying blindly. And so they could have substantial money, and they would give substantial money to the pharmaceutical industry, but with the deterioration of the social welfare system in France and the success we could see overseas, what we would call the HMO, the health maintenance organizations, we have changed. And we've seen that those having the monopoly could actually impose their will. But this balance between the two sectors, on the one side the pharmaceuticals and on the other side medical research and social security, is not a natural balance. And the economist doesn't see where we could find a common ground. And we go from one side where we have excessive money to another where we have nothing at all. And it's difficult to find the right tipping point. And this is what we've seen in France. And for instance, we've seen that with the generic drug that was set up and the legal protection of period for patents. I'm not criticizing without any evidence, because I was one of the initiators of the system and I have to be able to criticize it. We are in a situation which is quite sensitive now, where research with investors, with production, tended to shore out to Asia, to the US, and we are at a stagnation because we are ranking third. And we only account for 15% of clinical trials worldwide versus 27% in the US and 60% for Asia. And there's a continued decline of patents that have been deposited and submitted. We have a drop of 30% versus an increase in Germany, that means that we are in a situation which raises concerns. And a delay in world therapy. 80% of pharmaceutical industry think that France is not attractive or little so. So plans have been launched. France 2013, Medicines for Europe. We'll talk about it later. I'm not sure that it's up to par to our challenges and will help us overcome these challenges. I think that for France, we have to rethink this balance between social security pharmaceutical industry and research. We have to reshape everything to find the right balance where research is reshored in France, not exclusively in France, of course, but much more, and we have to change the trend. Thank you for this exhaustive and comprehensive introduction that will help us tackle all these subjects in detail. I'm very happy to moderate a panel where we have gender equality, perfect gender equality, which seldom do we find in such debates. Thank you for being here. We'll try to have a bit of time at the end for a Q&A, if we can. I won't promise that everybody can ask a question anyway, but we'll try to have some time to do so. So I'm going to give 3 minutes to each of you as an introduction, so you can talk about the viewpoint that you want to focus on, and then we'll have a debate. Yasmine Belkaïd, you're the General Director of Institut Pasteur. I'm going to turn towards you first. We're going to talk about the pandemics because this is the systemic risk that we have to face in terms of healthcare, which is the main risk. I would like to have your opinion, your take on the conditions of our sovereignty, of our healthcare sovereignty, because this is one of the important issues. We'll talk about the US that's exerting a lot of pressure on us. As the General Director of Institut Pasteur, what is your take on this? Well, first of all, I think you're not exaggerating at all. I think that the situation is indeed that you have described. Namely, innovating treatments are speeding up. There's more and more innovating therapy. That's the golden age of research, medicine, and medicine development. However, we have them only in China, and a large part of medicines are being manufactured in the US. So we are in a situation that is close to what we had for COVID in Africa, where access to vaccine was not present in Africa. Is that the future that we want to have? So we find ourselves in a situation where Africa was during COVID, where there was unequal access to vaccines. Well, the solution would be to go up to 3% in terms of investments in science. We've talked about a 3% investment for a long time, but it's a necessity more than ever. And the solution would be to reach a 3% investment so that all the value chain, and I concur with what you said, that would be actually the right system for the manufacturing and everything, research, but also manufacturing of medicine should be on the same continent. All our talents, exodus, is no longer an exodus because the Nobel Prizes are here. They no longer leave. So we have a double opportunity and we have to find a place for them now. With our governments, with the elections, we have to remember that it is not something that is not negotiable. So we have to give them the means to do so. And we'll talk about investment. Etienne Tichid from Novo Nordisk, I think this session is really at the heart of the news. And we're dealing with all the pharmaceuticals industry. We have to change all the time. And we talked about means, we talked about investment. There's a problem that is always on the table. It's the pricing. There's a lot of pressure from the US because the US say we have to sell our medicine at a lower price. What is your take on this? It's more expensive. We have to sell not at a lower price, but a higher price. Yes, indeed, you're right. So you were talking about integrated chain. It's very important because in Novo Nordisk patent, we have a Danish foundation and we always try to keep the integrated value chain. So research, production, the sale is all kept in embedded one chain, one value chain. Because if we want to have sustainability for a production chain, we know that we can also have the upper hand on the production chain because we want to get the upper hand on research, on industrialization, but also on how to sell our products. So we can see the weaknesses very well. One of the weaknesses, to answer to your question, is that we are going through the same thing as for NATO and defense. Often an American state would decide not to subsidize research And they want an acknowledgement of research through price. So if we want to protect health care, but also our health, because we're talking about us, we're talking about our health, and we're all waiting for funding that doesn't come, and it will not come anymore. And when we talk about this, we talk about the price of drugs. And the price of French drugs is the one used by the US to try to lower the prices in the US. And it's a benchmark price, a baseline, if you want. So if the US does not fund our labs as they would do in the past, with higher prices, it will be up to Europe to do so. And so, de facto, in Europe, the country which offers the lowest drugs is France. Italy stands at 15% to 16% above the European average, and attracts industry where France would like to have industry, would like to have research, and would like to pay drugs 14% less than the European average. So it's a lose-lose situation. So I am still optimistic because I'm at the head of a lab where we try to keep this value chain. I believe in innovation and research. We need to fund innovation, and it needs to be state-funded, and it's essential because our healthcare is at stake. And we need to keep the upper hand on the industry, but not the industry of the drugs of the 50s. We need to keep the upper hand on an industry that creates value and that the others want to have, and we want to sell it out to the rest of Europe. And if we manage to have research in Europe, because we have the brains, we need funding. And if we manage to have access to products and a fast assessment of products and a price that is compatible, then we can have fast access to treatment in France. And if we add the component of manufacturing, then we can export massively. Thank you. We can see the importance of health and drugs in our society today. Elix Prader, health is a growth driver, which is very important. In terms of public opinion, through social networks, we've seen how important it is. There have been a lot of debates. I'm not going to delve into it. In your opinion, I would like to have your take on COVID, because it has revealed the geopolitical aspect of healthcare, hasn't it? Yes, indeed. Everything that you've said is not related to COVID, but during COVID, we have seen how much was at stake for the population, and how much this issue could destabilize democracies, bearing into account the impact it could have on the public opinion. We knew it as experts, but we've discovered that 80% of drugs were manufactured in all or part elsewhere, where it was only 20% 20 years ago. So we have become weaker in a generation, in the span of a generation, and this is what this pandemic has revealed. So we have a legitimate need of sovereignty in terms of healthcare, and this relies upon everything that has been mentioned, but it's not a desert island where we're going to find a haven. It's a complex causal relationship where we have to have research, production, manufacturing, storage, strategic storage. It's costly to have strategic storage in case of crisis, but we've made a lot of progress in pinpointing exactly what we needed to do, but then we have to fund it. And all the question is, are we ready? Do we have the means to do so? And I would say that health care does not have a lot of industrial specificity. The same goes for defense and so on. What is very specific, it's the funding model by social protection, by the public. We have public and private funding, depending on the case. But the paradox and the vicious circle in which we are is that if we want to have products where we have control, which are produced locally, it has an extra cost. because of our welfare system, and we have more costs, and of course this exacts a toll on everything. And that's one of the additional arguments to say that we need to have a welfare system that needs to be reviewed in terms of KPIs. And I would like to give you two examples. It's not just a matter of drugs that accounts for 13% of public spending, but if we take into account over 60-year-olds, 22% of the population, 57% of public spending. So we understand that care needs to change so that we have the necessary means to invest. Hospital, 47% of public spending. Hospitals require a different and more satisfactory resource allocation. The population wishes to have robust hospital systems and high quality that would be less scattered away and less costly. But that requires a lot of changes, and we have to address the situation. And we need the right investments because we know it today, and we've seen it over the last 2 days. We can't spend more. We need to reallocate the resources. We need to be more efficient. We need to be more agile in the way we spend money. So we need to be brave enough to change the situation. When I talk about, I'm not talking about reform. We need political courage as well, yes. But we need to be smart in the way we sequence development. It's going to be difficult to change the way we care for the elderly and for long-term diseases. We have to address the problem of underserved medical healthcare areas. So, as the General Director of Médecins Sans Frontières, you can give us your take on the situation. We've talked about the social welfare system, about drugs. How can we fight against the big risks of healthcare in a crisis situation? You are fully aware of the situation. What about mobilization when we face a world health crisis? Does it actually foster or does it entail a bigger gap? I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to answer to your question, because MSF deals with millions of patients throughout the world, and the question that is being raised is, before anything, aiming at reducing inequalities. So first of all, I would like to address one point, because what is at stake in a table round such as this one is access to drugs as a new geopolitical arena. But it's not new. The fact that we've discovered that politics was part and parcel of healthcare during COVID is maybe because we didn't know that everywhere else geopolitics was at the heart of everything. Médecins Sans Frontières did alert on this healthcare crisis, and we would talk to a government and alert on a Rubella epidemics in Nigeria, and we would also name and shame the problems that underpin this crisis. That's the same thing that would prepare the French government to have problems at first of the COVID, and that would give light on the lack of preparedness. So there are universal rules that we can set. More broadly, with Médecins Sans Frontières, we are on the front of everything. When we have to deal with the health security for AIDS, for instance, that's actually a typical case. Or maybe Ebola, the Ebola crisis that we're facing in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It has an international safety dimension. We can have also silent healthcare crisis, and we can talk about the silent crisis that reflects the explosion of chronic diseases, including diabetes in the global south. And what they have in common is to reveal greater inequalities in terms of access to healthcare. Those that would benefit from the efforts of research, of access to innovation and access to therapy are often on the sidelines. And this is where there's something interesting to debate. They give a mobilization, they give us a reason to mobilize, to engage. And that can be a driver, a catalyst for change, for leapfrogs. And I would like to list a few issues that we'll certainly tackle. When we talk about tensions between research scientists, industrialists, civil society movements and patients associations like Médecins Sans Frontières and governments, we have several issues that need to be addressed. One of them is, of course, the matter of the drug price, access to drugs, and affordability. Not so long ago, in the years 2000, an antiretroviral therapy in Africa would cost 10,000 euros. So when we talk about the fair price of drugs, of course, it's a matter of theory, and this can be debated. When we talk about the fair price of drugs, we need transparency on the breakdown of a price, and we need innovation. What is it all about? Because if the retrovirals are an innovation, and also Fosbusyre, the drug against hepatitis C, which was sold at $80,000 at first, and it is indeed because of its initial renovation, and then the patents, the lever greening, that's part and parcel of another issue which can be discussed at length. I would like to talk about two other issues: accessibility, price, but also as a matter of production, manufacturing. And when we talk about international healthcare crisis with Médecins Sans Frontières, we have to face patients who suffer from real crisis, but nobody's engaged. And they don't have access to drugs because nobody's interested. And the wealthy countries are not interested. For example, we have the problem of meningitis or sleep apnea, where we have a lot of people who died because they have no access to that disease. TB, for 50 years, we had no medical innovation because it was relegated, it was on the back burner, and we had no good vision on this. And then there's the problem of issues relating to research, and I would like to go back to Ebola. We'll talk about that. Yes, we'll talk about it later, because we have to go back to specifically to the matter at hand. So it's just to finish, that raises the question, because we have to talk about what kind of shared responsibility. So to follow up on this, when we talk about systemic risk, Yasmin Belkait, do we risk having another world pandemic? Because there are people traveling all over the world, getting on a plane, and that raises an issue, yes. I would like to say that we're not sheltered from anything. There are epidemics all the time everywhere, may it be malaria, Ebola, smallpox. We can always face epidemics all the time, everywhere. And we are an animal in a chaotic environment, and we're vulnerable because we are animals, and there are viruses that are mutating all the time. We have deforestation, there are pressures on the environment. We have population displacements, we have healthcare crises where people are displaced and they live in camps where we could have malaria, and that shows cholera, and that shows that we are in a risk situation where we could have emergences of emergence and re-emergences of viruses. And we are never sheltered from a crisis because pathogens evolve. And there are events and situations of vulnerability. I think the COVID crisis has taught us that we can become very vulnerable towards a new emerging virus for which we have no defense. But we are in the 21st century, but it continues, and we have to remain prudent and vigilant. Research continues to move forward. So if we should focus on the situation beyond the structural shocks, what are the levers to allow France to keep having a cutting-edge healthcare industry? And what about the manufacturing tissue? Because we can't do anything without the manufacturing system.
Well, I'll focus on innovation because, when there's a new crisis, there are new pathogens, and that means we'll need to innovate. And in 2050, half of the global population will be with chronic diseases, which means we need daily solutions. Well, we can work on prevention. That's one thing. That's one side of things. But on the other hand, if you need treatments, you require to focus on innovation. This is a different mindset. Our industry is a key strategy, but we're an industry based on innovation, and it's thanks to innovation that we'll be able to support research. Why should we believe in research? Because we have excellent researchers in France. It's a pity when they leave. As you said before, some stay with us, which is a good thing. Now we have to find good reasons to stay, to work in fundamental research, but also clinical research. Let me give you an example with clinical research. Spain, in a couple of years, has managed to become number 4 in the world in clinical research. It's not that far away from us. We're in Europe, a Latin country, as we say, in Europe. So let's do what Spain's done, and let's make sure that clinical research is at the heart of what we do. That is, that mentally speaking, we have to believe in innovation. Health is not at wartime. It's not food that you give when there's war, then you need base treatments, and that's enough, because when there's war, that's what you need. No, what we need is to do more in the health industry. We need to prevent diseases from reoccurring and associated diseases. So we need to focus more on research and have stronger research. For this, we have researchers. Now, the question is to fund that. How can we fund that? How can we make sure we have the conditions so that the researchers will find good reasons to stay here? Now, back to clinical research. Today, the pharmaceuticals industry finances 6.2 billion in France. 6.2 billion. Think about this. That's investments in our hospitals and researchers, because we want to innovate. We want to use these innovations for clinical purposes and show that they really have benefits. Second thing, the industrial sides of things. It's very important to take this bend. Our company and our factory in the town of Chartres was built in 1960, and we've always invested in the factory. The question is, we have to invest on innovating molecules and products. We have to make the right choices, because there are appealing, attractive, and desirable drugs that other countries will buy. I'm talking about innovation. That means therapeutical innovation, environmental innovation, and that means we have to reconcile the different strands of innovation, and then access to drugs. It's not normal today, because it takes 600 days before people have access to a treatment in France. It's not normal to have 10 different drugs that are approved in Europe and 4 that don't reach the borders of France. So we have to find the new balances. And there are examples in Spain and Italy that show that we can reconcile all that. That's called competitiveness in our industry. And Madame Belkaïd, I think you wanted to react to this. Yeah, I don't want to see things in a gloomy way. I don't want to be the gloom monger. But yeah, there will be new pandemics. There are infectious diseases. But collectively, we've never been that fast to find solutions. That's the good news. The world is ready. We have the technologies. We know how to accelerate these technologies to face these new pandemics. We have everything it takes. We saw that with COVID. The collective power that we have when the world is more aligned, we have power to act. There will be new pandemics, but the reality is that more than ever we can develop new therapies, new treatments. Good, that's positive. Thank you. Now, Alex Prader, what about insurance and insurance companies? We've talked about money. What about the insurance companies? April is one of the best brokers in France. Now, insurance comes down the chain, the world of insurance companies. We're here to manage risks. So we prevent risks. That is, we act so to avoid the occurrence of risks. And if these occur, we want to manage flows. And the flows, that is when there's a peak. So, insurance companies, we can do 2 things. First, liability, or that is we help states to anticipate the total cost of these crises. This is what we see when there's an act of God. The insurance companies were asked to work on that, the natural disasters. It could be the same for the health crises, and there are several virtues in doing that. The first one is that we would give a price to that, or rather the cost, and the other side is the premia and the bonuses, the upsides, and we could use that to work on prevention measures, what we have to do beforehand, so that when there's an act of God, it's less costly. And the second virtue is that type of incentive, because you can have better conditions if you're well prepared. That's for responsibility and liability. And then there's the health insurance, the health cover. And in this case, again, the world of health insurance is going through difficulties because the links between the compulsory regime, that is 75% is the case in France, and the rest is additional private insurance policies. So the insurers could be seen as partners, and in any case, we need to focus very much on prevention. The insurance companies could become actors in the world of prevention. And to finish on that, I'd like to say we could act when the crises emerge. We would think more in terms of partnership. Well, that's because we can afford that as Westerners. But if you look at things from a distance and look at the globe, and in keeping with what Madame Belkaïb was saying, Claire Magon, are there examples that work in the world? Yes, of course. Even though usually when people mobilize, there are many people who die, though, unfortunately. 2 examples, quickly. AIDS. I was saying before, this is a very interesting case. Please remember, in the 90s, when the antiretroviral drugs were available for the northern countries, there were millions, and I mean millions, of people who were dying in the south. And people were aware of that all over the world. And that, by the way, is very important today, because all the different stakeholders, those who want to be mobilized against these epidemics, have to remember that, and the industrial groups as well. That is, there are inequalities, and they're close to us. We can see them on TV. So the civil society organizations were asking for these antiretroviral drugs, and we, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, we saw that people were dying in the south. So we asked for these drugs, and the civil society movements were reacting. And also, at the time, there were obstacles to reduce inequalities, and people were saying, well, for the Africans, it doesn't work the same way. At the time, the USAID director was saying they don't have a watch, they don't know how to take an antiretroviral drug. Well, for us, we know that our patients took them immediately, which is the case today. They know how to take their drugs. They know how to use these innovations. So we had to fight. That was a fight, to fight against the headwinds. For instance, we fought against IP, an excess of IP. There was a court case against South Africa at a time when South Africa was trying to use the special waivers on IP so that they could import generics if it's about public health. And therefore, we had to face these headwinds, and then there were other obstacles coming from other states. But these antiretroviral drugs, when they were available massively for the population, they had a massive impact so as to reduce the AIDS pandemic. Now, Ebola 2014, the biggest epidemic since the discovery of the virus 50 years before, we realized that we had no drugs, no treatments whatsoever. We, MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, Liberia, Guinea, Sierra Leone, up to 90% lethal rates, lethality. It's a very lethal disease. It's terrifying if you look at the symptoms. And however, relatively rapidly, a couple of years later, in 2018, during the second wave of Ebola, we got the treatments, the fruit of accelerated research. We had vaccines and antiretroviral drugs. And unfortunately, we're animals, and the viruses are not an exact science. The epidemics that we're seeing in the Democratic Republic of Congo is a different strand. And therefore, again, there's another objective. We have to accelerate our efforts in the field of research, and we ourselves are committed We work with the academics and researchers, and as we speak, we are trying out trials so as to test a cocktail, if you will, of drugs, antiviral drugs and monoclonal drugs, and a vaccination strategy, so that in real time we can document the progress, so that all this is available quickly. And, you know, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders are here. This is the clinical trial. That is, we will produce data from what we do. That is, from the patients. It should be good for them first, because in the history of research, and with Ebola, we didn't have much research about Ebola until 2014, and it had been taken away, confiscated, appropriated by the American army. Okay, back to Europe. Yasmin Belkaid, according to you, what are the conditions that are necessary so that we can regain our health sovereignty? I'll start with you. Okay. First, health protection against the pandemics. Speak in the mic, please. Yes. The conditions are the following. First, constant supervision. We should be on the watch out. We should be ready. It's preparedness. You can't develop a vaccine if there's no active research. Let me give you an example. Most of the data, most of research, most of the funds on infectious diseases is in the US. So, for good preparedness, it should get out of the laboratories in America so that Europe has active research and proactive research. This is what we're doing. We have a knowledge of 160 pathogens. Hantavirus was not very serious, but when it reached France, we had worked in research. We had some drugs developed at Pasteur, and we can deploy those quickly if we need them. So first is protection, and that means making sure that we relocate research and knowledge. And collectively in Europe, we should share the knowledge so that we're always in a position to face new emerging microbes. I think it's very dangerous today if you look at our knowledge acquired, if you look at our knowledge on the most aggressive pathogens, research is only in the US, only in the US. So, and I believe that in the future, Institut Pasteur and other research institutes will be working in cooperation so that we can nurture this ecosystem of knowledge, and we'll always be prepared. Okay, Etienne Tichy. How do you manage these chronic diseases? What about the benefits of this on the sustainability of the system? You're in the heart of this nuclear reactor. I think you talked about big monies before. Yeah, so let's talk about money. Let's talk about money. The study was made with Cabinet Asteres firm, that is the Franco-Danish Alliance for Health. There are 7 pathologies that cost Social Security 52 billion. 52 billion. If I take one disease I know, obesity, the total cost in France, 12.7 billion for Social Security. The cost for the employer and for society, and for those who can't have access to employment, 9 billion every single year. You don't need to have the grand total of all that. If we don't act today, the total cost is much more than action. You know what I mean? And as you know, you were talking about a drug before that represents 14% of the total health budget. I have bad news for you. It's the case in Europe. In France, we're at 8.5. 8.5% of the Social Security budget is for drugs. And this number's been going down constantly. Each time we need to reduce Social Security budget, it's against drugs. And the first drug that will suffer is innovation. The one thanks to which you will no longer have these 52 billion for the 7 chronic diseases, the one that's the best solution. And unfortunately, you will miss these opportunities because no access or little access, you'll miss the opportunity because there's no incentive for industrial companies to invest in this region, and other regions will seize this opportunity. I gave you an example before, clinical research with Spain. There's another very good example with Italy, with industrial manufacturing. And we have Scandinavian countries that are pro-innovation. It's the only solution to reduce the big bill, the big invoice. As I said, 52 billion for French social security. So the opportunity means action, action for innovation, financing innovation through the price of drugs. Okay, that's a good segue. Alex Prader, we're talking a lot about AI and digital and the like. What about this in the total equilibrium? You have this passion both for health and for technology. So what can we do with AI and digital today, given what we've been talking about? Well, AI and digital are here to support our efforts, but we need to finance that. It's costly. Correct, but if you just say, I'm using digital, nothing's going to happen. It should be included in the usages we make of things. If you look at our system, we're really good at analyzing things, but it's very difficult for us to execute and to do things in a tangible way. Now, for AI, the problem is sovereignty as well. Nothing to do with health in this case. This applies to other industries, as we've said over the past 2 days. We're no exception in this case. So I was about to say, what about procurement? What do you mean? Tendering? Or, well, yes, official tenders. But the government no longer has money. I agree. Let me give you an example. The case management programs, the very first ones, HMOs, the ones you mentioned, the SOFIA programs. That was in 2009, 2010. The French Social Security was ready to deploy that, etc. Now, there were many private players in France who were ready to follow and to better manage risks and to use technology so that we have better observance, etc., so that people would take their drugs. There was a tender. What were the criteria? No French players were accepted, only the Americans, because they had to have seniority. But the French stakeholders were ready for these investments. So there was a first tender. They took the second biggest American player. It didn't really work. Second tender, they took the number one American player. And it didn't work because the Americans were using a different model. They would use data differently. And it was a flop. And unfortunately, we didn't help the French stakeholders. That's true in other industries. I agree with you. So as far as AI is concerned, we're talking about Mistral, okay, but we need to have orders. We need a tender. We need to focus on the French actors and stakeholders so that they develop the drugs we need, so that we have a good control over the industry. Because if we take tools off the shelf, we'll miss this opportunity. Well, Yasmine Belkaïd, what about Institut Pasteur, therefore? What's your role? What's the role of the Pasteur Institute so that we regain our sovereignty in this area? Do you have any proposals? Do you make proposals? Well, I suppose you have ideas. The Institut Pasteur Institute has a very specific model. Our model's always been based on integration between research and public health. So our institute is here to understand fundamental research and to think about public health. So we have people in high-level research on pathogenesis mechanisms, but they also are deployed in case of crises. So one of the solutions is to maintain these integrated research ecosystems. We connect with 33 other bodies in the world. The other thing is that we're stronger together. The Institut Pasteur works with other European organizations and international bodies so that we create clusters of excellence. For instance, insect-borne diseases will be stronger together at international level with all types of countries. We'll be networking, we'll be working together constantly, we'll train people. Do you agree with this? Do you work hand in hand, Claire Magon, with the Institut Pasteur? Yes, of course. Oh my, I'd like to end on that point, that is innovation and global health. I was saying before that we've seen an explosion of diseases, and there's a difference between the north and the south, but it doesn't make any sense any longer. Chronic diseases, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, cancer, etc. So access to innovation is something we have to think about at a global level. And I'm thinking about our patients. Our position is based on our experience. That is, people want innovation, and they know how to use innovation. Let me take the example of diabetes. The director of Novo Nordisk is here. Novo Nordisk has, with two other companies, has an oligopoly on insulin and very precious tools, insulin injection systems. In Bangladesh, in refugee camps, our patients are treated against diabetes. Oh, by the way, life expectancy for someone with type 1 diabetes is 13 years. 13 years. Think about this. It's a game changer for them. And so we have insulin drugs for self-injections. People no longer depend on syringes or flasks. That's what they can do. I know these products have to be cooled all the time, but they have systems with special clay-made skins so that the drugs are not too warm. But it's an industrialist choice, and when they export these drugs that are less profitable for them, this is bad for us. This is awful for many patients. So we have to continue and think about shared responsibility. And as you were saying before, we can't spend more. Well, yes, we can. We have to. The industrial groups will have to do this. Okay, we get your point. But it's more than that. We have to finance innovation. AIDS, for instance. If you look at these transformations, people were mobilized, financially speaking, PELFAR and all these drugs. No, that's finished with Trump and Clinton and all that. But anyway, what we have to find the money with innovation, with innovative mechanisms. Well, it's in the equation, and we at MSF, we support that. We'd like to have a soda tax, 1 cent on each of these drinks, to fund malnutrition in the world. Okay, we get your point. A final question before we listen to Philippe Trainard, who's going to wrap up. Etienne Trichit, what about the priorities, according to you, for the next French president? Would you give the next president tips? Okay, well, hard to say. Well, first, let's buy European drugs. Let's buy European innovation. Let's make sure that France is one of the European champions in the health industry. That's to start with. If we can do this to start with, you will see we'll manage to bolster research, fundamental research, clinical research, industrial manufacturing, the price of drugs that'll go up at the right level, so that Europe, that has 450 million inhabitants, will be a region, as we usually say, during the panel discussions, will be a sovereign region. So if you want to re-establish this global balance, you have to make sure that innovation is recognized. We have to buy European drugs, and since our buyers is mainly the states, well, the states will have to think this way. Okay, that's really interesting. As you can see, there's a lot of work that we need to do, but we've made progress. And could we end on a positive stance? Mr. Trainard, Philippe Trainard, in a couple of minutes. Okay, from what I gathered, I'd say that there's one thing that we all share, which is that there are epidemics at all times, but pandemics are sometimes renewed, to use the expression, or there are more of those. That's the first thing. It's a big challenge. Second thing, as far as France is concerned, it's a bit paradoxical. The costs are high, the prices are low, so, well, this is quite appalling, well, mainly in France. Yet we shouldn't be totally pessimistic. Sometimes I sound like I'm pessimistic, but anyway, number two, we need to focus more on innovation with innovating treatments, and that means there's a lot of hope on the way. And if we're too far from this world, otherwise people will be in despair. And what are the solutions? Well, there are a number of solutions. First, innovation. Innovation is key. Innovation is really at the heart of everything. And the first key step in the innovation process that we need to invest in, and by the way, governments are here to do this, and then the industrial players, is fundamental research. Fundamental research, academic fundamental research, because that's what we need so that we have good preparedness for the future challenges ahead. And then, of course, the best thing is to join the production or manufacturing chain, but also to be one of the European players and better integration in Europe. And also, maybe we need to have this conversation on IP. But then the public authorities, the governments have a role to play. If Institut Pasteur is not protected, of course, they will not innovate. Right, okay, we'll say that's the end of the session, Philippe. So that's what I'll take from that, and sometimes to have groupings of international companies. Okay, thank you very much. We can put our hands together for the speakers. Thank you very much. And there's another session in a couple of minutes. Thank you for listening to us. And for those who are watching online, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the evening. It's almost the end of the day, but there's still another session, still work to do. Please stay with us for the next session. Thank you.